All right, guys, a lot of hype going on, a lot of awesome stuff that happened here today. We had the High Elf Army roster fully revealed. So I'm particularly really fired up about this. Finally, we get to see a little bit more about what's coming with the High Elves. I've had a boner since they announced that the High Elves are going to be in the game, so I'm fired up. If you didn't get a chance to catch the actual cast, it is on Total Wars YouTube and on their Facebook, so you can see what they were all talking about. They went into a little bit about the lore and fluff of the High Elves. Some of the stuff's like they were mentioning, like, the High Elves are named the Asur, the Wood Elves are named the Asari, and then the Dark Elves are named the Druchi. And pretty much they were talking about a lot of stuff that we've already talked about, in that High Elves are effectively the nicest of the elves. Wood Elves are kind of aloof and standoffish, whereas the Dark Elves are sinister and cruel and just all around assholes. But you have a pretty good idea now from what we've kind of already talked about in our base going overs of High Elves, and you have a pretty good idea of what's to come based off of what they discussed. And that's what we're going to go over here today, is just everything that they went through. We're going to go break it down real quick, just discuss it real fast. They were saying essentially the High Elves as a whole are a really good entry faction. They're going to be very forgiving when it comes to micro. It's going to have not as many micro intensive units, and a lot of units that are very defensive. In general, that's kind of the High Elves theme. So it's pretty fitting. We went into the two legendary lords, with Tyrion being very melee. They were saying he's quite strong, and he's going to be. And this is always like a moniker that every single melee character has in the tabletop, but he's the most skilled fighter in the Warhammer universe. And that's pretty true. If you know anything about the universe, you know that, like, it's Tyrion and like Abhorrash, who is like the creator of the Blood Dragon vampire line. They're pretty much, and Abhorrash is never really actually seen as a model in the tabletop. He's only just a prominent lore figure. But as we know, Tyrion is going to be quite strong. He's going to have his epic mount, Malhandir, who is an elven steed. And one of the cool things about elven steeds is they're not impeded by barbed armor. So in other factions, they get the armor on them. They do slow down a bit in speed, not with the High Elves. The High Elves, all their barbed speeds of the Ithilmar armor, it does not slow them down. So Malhandir will have a barbed armor of his own, and he will be and he won't be hindered by that speed. So it'll be true to the current lore of the elven steeds. He's going to have the duelist classification, which is what the classification they're actually going to give on him, similar to, like, melee expert and such. But what it really is going to mean is he's going to be good against strong targets, and he's really going to flatten out against what they call chaff. Just your total garbage unit, like a goblin spearmint unit, stuff like that. So pretty much, I would think of him as a hero/monster sniper. Maybe an anti-infantry on him. I'm not really sure. Probably have an AP characteristic as well. But I'm curious to see how they do some of his magic items like Sun Fang, and if they give him the armor of an Aryan as well. So it'll be really awesome to see as things progress what gets fleshed out with Tyrion. They were saying also that aside from a Pegasus, nothing can really escape Tyrion on the run. So that's pretty imposing. That's pretty terrifying as far as his ability to be mobile and be fast at the same time. Then we have Tyrion's twin brother, Teclis. So he's going to be the caster of the legendary lords. And if you know anything about the lore, you know that Tyrion is this warrior, the consummate high elf warrior. And at the same time, Teclis is very frail. He's a lot of the curse of an Aryan is what it's called, has given him frailty, and he's very poor of health. He's got low stamina. He's just a very sickly individual. And once he gets into magecraft, he learns how to make potions and spells and bindings and whatnot that actually boost his I don't want to say his libido, because that's not what I'm trying to say, but his libido. And he actually can go through a day in the sun without having to worry about a heat stroke or stuff like that. The books talk about how he just can't go long periods until he actually becomes a mage, and then he can. Now he's actually a stalwart individual, but nothing like his brother. But all that was kind of leading up to the fact that he is very squishy, and they did talk about the fact that he will have his pointy hat. The Crown of Saffrey will be in the game, is what I took that as. They didn't say the Crown of Saffrey in specific, but they said he will have his pointy hat. They kind of alluded to a couple things with stuff like that, or they might have just been cheeky British people. You never know when it comes to those folk. But he will be squishy, so he'll have his potion of Chariots, which is in, I think it's last seen in 6th or 7th edition, but basically it takes away his magic powers and increases his survivability. They said that it's going to take away from the winds of magic in specific when it says his magic powers, and we don't really know what his survivability is going to be. Is he going to have a vulnerability? Is he going to have a ward save? Is it going to be an increase to his HP or his defense, melee armor, or melee defense? So we're not sure how that survivability is going to play out, but we do know that he's getting something like that. He'll also have the mount of a barbed Lamar steed, which is basically, Lamar is like a fancy word for an armored steed, to think of it that way, just to kind of break it down easily. There's obviously more lore connotations behind that wording, but it's just a way to say it's a well-armored, fast steed. But that's just the legendary lords. We do have the regular lords, and I'm a little surprised here that we're not going to be seeing Archmage as a legendary lord. And there are some lords that they left off of the list, and I'm going to just touch on those real quick here. So the lords that are going to be on the roster are the prince or the princess. The prince will be the sword and shield variant, and the princess will be a sword, bow, lighter armored variant. The difference between the two is the prince will have access to an Lamar steed, which is a steed with the barbed armor on it, a great eagle, then a sun dragon, and then a star dragon. The princess will just have a normal elven steed, then a moon dragon, then a star dragon. So they will both end up on the strongest dragon, but the princess gets access to the dragon a bit faster, and it's a bit stronger than the sun dragon is. The moon dragon is kind of mid-tier, star dragon being top tier, and obviously sun being bottom of the barrel, but still a dragon nonetheless. So how bottom of the barrel can you be as a dragon? But to kind of go over what they left out, they didn't touch the Archmage, they didn't touch the Anointed of Assyrian, there's no Dragon Mage, we won't be seeing a Handmaiden of the Everqueen or a Sea Helm. So if you were counting on any of those units in the game, unfortunately they're not going to be in right now. I could see them in a future DLC, and a lot of people are already starting to speculate this on, maybe they'll add Handmaidens and Shadow Warriors in a future DLC, as like a Civil War type thing with Dark Elves. That is a possibility, but right now, currently not in the army roster as is. And if you are wondering what those units are like, please feel free to drop off at the High Elf lore video I've made. I do go into the lore for those units, so you have an idea of at least what you're missing out on. But I do think that they'll either add them in a DLC, or there'll be some sort of way we'll get something similar to them or reminiscent. I don't think all of them will be in, like the Sea Helm, I don't see being in the game, period. That wasn't a huge competitive choice tabletop wise, so I don't, and not a lot of people use it, so I don't really see it coming in. But that's neither here nor there. The heroes, though, we have, which is an interesting choice here. So the heroes we have are the Mage, the Noble, and then the Lore Master of Hoeth. The Lore Master of Hoeth is a Lord choice in the tabletop, and the really cool thing about him in the tabletop is he has access to every single lore attribute and signature spell of all the battle magics. He doesn't get to choose outside of that. He just gets the signature spells, but it's pretty powerful as it is. What they described him as, he's going to be a caster of sorts. So I'm not sure how that's really going to factor in. Like I said, in the lore or in the tabletop, he does have access to all of the signature spells. So I'm wondering if they're going to give him something like that, or at least all the lore attributes, something along those lines. He will have a great sword, as is befitting of the Lore Master of Hoeth, and the Sword Masters thus of. So that's going to be AP and anti-infantry, they were saying. But he's going to be a hero with the power of a lord. They were saying he's going to be one of the most powerful heroes to date. So that's something to note, that having him in an army is going to be pretty advantageous outside of his whatever agent abilities he has as a hero. Outside of that, we have the Mage, who's just going to be your basic caster, and your Noble, who's going to be either on a steed or an Lamar Chariot. And he's going to have access to a halberd, which is going to be anti-large, of course. But that rounds off the Lord's heroes and legendary lords. I'm a little curious to see what they do with mages and what kind of mounts they give them and what kind of lores they give them. They didn't go into any of the lores that we'll be seeing, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. One thing, and I know a lot of you have already kind of caught on to this, they did not include griffins, period. And I'm very surprised. So it leads me to kind of hopefully think that in the DLCs we'll see a griffin coming out on the hero Eltharion, or maybe even Alarielle, who is one of the who is the Everqueen, and the handmaidens coming with her. So those are all possibilities. That's purely speculation. Hopefully it happens. We don't know, but griffins are a pretty integral part of the tabletop roster. So I'm pretty surprised to not see them here. So I'm hoping for a DLC off of that alone. That's when I noticed that nobles and princes and princesses all can't ride griffins, which kind of seems funky to me. But we'll move right here into the infantry now. There are some units that, or there is a unit that we won't even get to use in custom battles or multiplayer, and that's the Gate Guard. It's basically just going to be a garrison guard, and it's especially well-trained archers. So they're campaign only for the most part. We don't know much about them, not in tabletop per se. I guess you could say they're part of the militia, but not in per se. So we have the first unit is Spearmint, with a variant, of course, to have their shields, but they're going to have, and all high elves are probably going to have martial prowess. They did not say exactly what it is. It's going to be a scaling ability, so as long as the unit's above 50% fighting strength, it's going to be advantageous to them. They didn't exactly say what it is. I'm assuming it's going to be something like increased melee attack and maybe even weapon strength. That's what I'm going to assume. They said, though, that it's not, because in tabletop, martial prowess gives them always strike first, basically. So they're no longer going to have that ability because that fact doesn't factor into Total War Warhammer. But they said that the tower shields in which they use are particularly good against missiles. So it leads me to think that maybe we'll be dealing with a silver shield unit in the Spearmint. There'll be a very good entry level, that's your lowest tier infantry unit you get with the Spearmint. Moving up the ladder here, though, we go to White Lions of Trace. And they have a great axe, which leads me to think maybe an anti-large with an AP characteristic. They did not say what it was, but I'm gonna think that. They also have the Lion Cloak, which is going to give them a missile defense. I'm gonna assume a bronze shield. I don't think it would be another silver shield, but I've been surprised before. But they're also going to add a really cool ability from the tabletop in Forest Strider. So it's since the White Lions of Trace historically are woodsmen that eventually ended up being the actual personal bodyguards of the Phoenix King. Before that, though, again, as woodsmen, they know how to fight and be in the woods. So they're going to have a bonus to fighting in the woods characteristic, which is going to be very advantageous to Lustria, because you can imagine how many woods we're going to have in a swampy, wooded Amazonian rainforest type area. So that's going to be very advantageous for the White Lions of Trace. Moving over then to the Sword Masters of Hoeth. They're going to have the great sword that the lore master has, so that AP anti-infantry characteristic. They're going to be basically like your typical greatsword unit, but they're going to have a little more skill. They're going to be faster, and they're going to have more leadership. So I look at that as higher melee attack, so the likelihood of hitting is more often. A little bit faster speed, and of course a better leadership. In fact, I'm going to assume that majority of the high elves have a good leadership. I think the only army we're going to see in Total War Warhammer 2 with a low leadership is going to be Skaven. Is that a real army? I don't even know what the hell a Skaven is. It's probably made up. Probably not even fucking real at all. But still, if there were a race of ratmen, I would assume them to be very scared of everything, including large wheels of cheese. But one thing that the Swordmasters have on the tabletop that they are debating putting in, is what it sounds like, is a deflection characteristic. They can basically deflect arrows, is how the lore kind of describes it. And they were saying, if it's something that the fans want, make a clamor, talk about it in the forums, talk about it on the subreddit, that you want the deflection skill in Total War Warhammer 2. He was kind of saying, does it make it OP if every single high elf unit has missile defense? No, because there's not a ton of missiles that we're going to be dealing with, I think, in Total War Warhammer 2 outside of the Dark Elves and the High Elves. And even the High Elves only have access to 1 unit or 2 units of archers. They got rid of their handmaidens, which are basically special archers. You can kind of almost look at them as Way Watchers, more or less. Well, not exactly, but the fact that they have very special bows. to do magic damage. But so if you do want the deflection skill and you know what I'm talking about from tabletop, do make a clamor about it. Say that you want it. Do whatever you want. They're gonna be looking out for is what it looks like. But moving over then into the Phoenix Guards, who are going to be what they said, very awesome looking models, very poignant centerpieces for the entirety of the High Elf army. So they're going to have halberds. They hinted at an immune to psychology. They were saying something along the lines of, these guys are not gonna go anywhere. They were saying that they're mute and they know when they're going to die, kind of hinting towards the fact that they're immune to psychology. That again would be totally reminiscent to the tabletop, so I'd be totally fine with that. But we're going to expect physical ward saves out of them. Again, same thing, reminiscent. And what they said is they're going to be comparable to Chosen with halberds, but weaker on the damage side, but still able to take a ton of damage themselves. So I'll look for a tankier, not as damaged, not as high DPS of a unit, but definitely a tankier unit in the High Elf army. But then we move over to the missile units that we've got. We've got two separate missile units here. We've got the archers and the archers with light armor, either variant, and the longbow, which is going to be on these units, and it's going to have the longest range of any early game archer. The only things that are going to outclass it really are the Way Watchers, but of course they outclass everything when it comes to range. But they'll be the cheapest missile units to break into. Then they're going to be really the best regimental style of archer in the game. You've got your Glade Guard, which aren't necessarily like a very regimented unit like the High Elves will be. And that's what they were saying, is it's as far as regimented firing lines go, this is going to be the best archer. And then one of my favorite units in the tabletop is the Lothern Sea Guard, and I'm really excited to see them in this game. They're going to have a no shield and a with shield variant, but basically they're going to have a spear, a longbow, and a shield. So they're going to be a hybrid melee / range unit, and they're not going to be, as I was saying, very micro intensive. And that's what I was saying earlier, how this army itself won't be as micro intensive because it'll have a natural counter to its counter. If Calvary decides to attack them, they're going to shoot at the Calvary, and right as Calvary enters range, they're going to drop bows and pick up shields and spears and skewer the Calvary. So it allows you to have a lot of versatility, and that same versatility you get from the tabletop unit, you're now going to get in Total War Warhammer, which is going to be exciting to see how that plays out in the competitive realm. Is it going to be something that's so strong or versatile that it needs to be in every single competitive multiplayer battle? I wonder how the point cost of them is going to attribute to their overall value on the actual game. But we do have then some Calvary. The High Elves do have quite a bit of Calvary, and I personally, my High Elves in the tabletop are mainly a Calvary army. But we have the Illyrian Reavers. They're the fast attack type light cav. They're going to have Vanguard deployment, and they're going to be the only unit in the army to have Vanguard. That kind of cemented that there's no Shadow Warriors in the game, unfortunately. Hopefully, like I was saying, in the future, but right now, no Shadow Warriors, unfortunately, guys. But the Illyrian Reavers, there's two variants, one with bows and one without. So it leads me to believe that the ones without are just going to have their spears like they do in the tabletop, and the ones with the bows are going to have their spears and their bows. I don't think that they're going to have one or the other. I think it's going to, if you spend the extra money, you get both, is what I hope or think, because that's the way, again, tabletop is. Then you've got the actual midline of their cav, but they're pretty damn good, is the Silver Helms. There's going to be a Silver Helm and Silver Helm with shield variant, and they're one of the best heavy calves in the game, actually, is what they were saying. And they're typical kind of heavy cav, perpetual fighting combat, perpetual in combat, lances. The tabletop has them as lances with swords, so I wonder if we're going to have a lance and a sword variant. They didn't say. Maybe the shield variant has a lance, or maybe the shield variant has a sword. So I'm going to assume it's just lances until we hear otherwise, because the tabletop predominantly has them as lances. But we shall see. That brings us to probably one of the most iconic and my absolute 100% favorite High Elf unit, the Dragon Princes. So these are going to be within the top 3 of the best cav in the game, probably up amongst the Blood Knights up there. They're going to have resistance to fire damage naturally, so Iron Drakes are just going to laugh at in their faces outside of the fact that they're dwarves. And they hinted at maybe an arrogance mechanic or some sort of stubborn mechanic, because they were saying, like, they're very arrogant, hard to control, blah, blah, blah. But it makes me think that maybe you can't cycle charge these units or something like that, because they're going to want to stay in the fray or something like that. So I'm wondering how, or if that was anything, or if I'm just grasping for straws. It's purely speculation. The way they kind of said it was like kind of tongue in cheek, so it made me think that there might be something going on. But again, purely speculative. And they were also saying that they're going to have the longest lances in Total War Warhammer history. And I don't know if that means it's an anti-large bonus, or if they're just making a dick joke, and it's just a really funny way to make a dick joke. I like dick jokes, so I'm hoping it's not just a dick joke, but I would assume it to be, if they're kind of in line with some of the top cav, that it would be an anti-large bonus that they get. But then there's the artillery piece the High Elves get. It's the only artillery piece they do get, and the only one in the tabletop as well. It's the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, and it's going to have 2 fire modes. And they're going to be toggleable. So you have 13 bolts in one for anti-large, and 13 bolts individually for anti-infantry. It's kind of a multi-shot is what they're going to call it. So you kind of have some flexibility in the bolt thrower, and having it kill infantry or having it kill large creatures. You can focus fire however you want. And we're moving into the chariots now, and one chariot is totally off the TT in the tabletop, and the other one is not so much. So we'll go into the Tiranoc Chariot, which is a missile chariot. It's going to have 2 bowmen per chariot, and an interesting turn of events here. They're giving that Tiranoc Chariot the Reaver Bow, meaning that it will actually have a magic bow that does magic damage and shoots 3 shots at once. And that's a bow that you only gave to heroes or lords in the tabletop, so I'm very surprised to see that here. But they're going to be decent melee armor and attack, and they're going to be the best missile chariot in the game, really. So it's going to be very interesting to see them kind of swooping in and out of the lines, shooting with this Reaver Bow, because it's going to be pretty amazing, I would assume. Then the Lamar Chariot, which is going to be a heavier armored melee version, is going to have barbed steeds, and it's going to have archers and spears on the back as well. And remember, the Lamar Chariot is one of the mounts that the noble can use, so the heroes can mount up on these as well. And it's going to be the melee version, like I was saying, that it competes with Gore Beasts, so it's going to be an armor-piercing thing as well. And we're coming up now to the large creatures, like the monstrous creatures of the High Elf roster here. We have the Flamespire and Frostheart Phoenixes. They're going to have 2 different mechanics, depending on which one you want. So the Flamespire Phoenix is going to be more resilient if there's higher winds of magic. And it's ideal really for a fighting lord, for someone who doesn't want to bring as much magic to the fore. So it allows you to benefit off of having a high winds of magic at 30, because that Flamespire Phoenix will scale with that higher or lower winds of magic. In addition to that, though, they get Wake of Fire, which is basically like your gyrocopter that can just drop bombs. This is going to be able to shoot fire pretty much underneath it, and you can click it a bunch of times repeatedly and effectively carpet bomb a unit, going back and forth over the unit, just like in tabletop, which was awesome, because you can have the Flamespire Phoenix fly over something in tabletop, then turn around and charge it, or turn around and charge something else. So it'll still do damage as it's flying over things, which kind of makes it scary. You know, you don't want it to fly over your units if it's going to already start doing a lot of damage to them. But it can be reborn too, as is the essence of a Phoenix. And at low health, they were saying it has a 50-50 chance to come back to life with reduced health. So I'm really curious to see how that works, because in the tabletop, there's a mechanic where it can explode back into life and do damage to everything around it, which would be just thematically, it'd be, or cinematically, it'd be a really awesome thing to see. But we now have the Great Eagle, which they were saying is going to be pretty much exactly like the Wood Elf Flying Eagle. The entry point to the monstrous units in general, it's going to be the cheapest one. But they will have an ability to summon them at any moment. They didn't really expand on this, but from what other people are telling me, is it's going to be something similar to the way we've seen what's the thing called, the Vortex work. So the Vortex might give them ability to, okay, they can summon this right now, this one moment, because they've accrued enough X amount of magic or blah 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 for it. So I'm really curious to see that, because I'm really curious to see what some of those Vortex abilities are going to be, but it's going to be a limited number of eagles, just how the Lizardmen are going to be able to summon cold ones. So it'll be awesome to see how those mechanics come out. Then we've got the Sun, Moon, and Star Dragons. So the Sun Dragon is going to be your lowest tier. It's going to have Fire Breath, not so focused, maybe kind of a cone attack, anti-infantry. Maybe is what I'm assuming here, and it's going to be the most wild of the 3 is what they were saying. So I'm not sure if they're going to have a characteristic that makes that most wild mean anything. But then you've got your Moon Dragon, which is going to have more a bit of a focused fire breath, which might just be a normal high weapon strength fire breath. It doesn't really lend to much, but they're saying a bit stronger, a bit pricier. But of course, with that price, you get the strength. And then the last one here is the Star Dragon, which is going to be the best dragon in the game. They're going to be the most expensive. It's going to have the best fire breath, and the breath is going to be more like a beam. And it's going to be heavy AP that just straight up melts armor. And it can't cast it constantly. You're looking around 2 to 3 casts in a match, and it'll have a cooldown, of course, and that's what's going to limit its casting. But it only can cast that from flying, so you can't be just like face to face with something and just melt it. But that is the army as a whole from what we know right now. There are some things that are left out. They didn't go into the White Lion Chariot. Instead, they added the Lamar Chariot, which was an interesting choice. We don't have any Shadow Warriors, unfortunately. No Lothern Skycutter, which is their kind of like floating barge with a different Eagle Claw bolter on it. It's like a slightly different variation of it. And no Sisters of Averlorn. The Sisters of Averlorn are the archers I was talking about. The Handmaiden of the Everqueen is the actual hero unit that would lead those Sisters of Averlorn. So I mistook earlier when I was speaking. I was just stream of consciousness, got a little confused there. But Sisters of Averlorn are the basically kind of like the Way Watcher units, like I was saying, of the High Elves. They're very elite archers, magic bows that do magic damage is what I would assume. So I would hope that they make that in, as well as the Shadow Warriors are 2 of my favorite units in the lore as far as like where they come from. Like Shadow Warriors are from like the previous area that the Dark Elves used to inhabit in Ulthuan, so they're all kind of like forsaken and trying to like earn their I guess you could say earn the High Elves' trust back as they do things, but at the same time they kind of carry the burden of both races. It's a really cool dynamic of the Shadow Warriors. I really enjoy them. I kind of like emo elves, more or less, but also one of the coolest damn things on the fucking roster. But that's everything here, guys. If you have any questions about what these things are like in the tabletop or how they all play, there's going to be a link after this video here in the end screen. You can take a look at the High Elf lore video. We'll also have a link over there to the High Magic that is going to be for the High Elves, as well as the Lizard Men. So definitely take a look at those if you're wondering some other stuff that's going to be in the High Elf army and what it's going to be like. But thanks for joining here, guys. Excited to see some more stuff on the High Elves. Have a good one and take care.